All right, let's get this underway. First of all, welcome everyone who has taken the time to attend this RDA Plenary 16 session for education and training on handling research data. I'm so happy you were able to make it. For this session, we're going to get started now. I come from an institution where it is by policy we start every meeting 5 minutes late, but I know that maybe not everyone does, so we'll split the difference and start at this point in time. We're going to start by taking care of a few housekeeping things before we get going with the session itself. This session is being recorded. This is a thing that you should know. If you are not okay with being recorded, you can turn your camera off and communicate through the chat window. We will also be exporting the chat, however, just so that we have a full representation of the discussion that happens today in our session so that the whole community can benefit from that. When you have a minute, take that and please type your full name into the participant window so everyone knows who you are. Also, go ahead and access those collaborative notes that are linked on the slides and also in your chat, and enter your name into the attendee list there. This session is being translated for speakers of Spanish, and to access that translation, you can go ahead and click on the little globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom window, and there are very kind translations being provided for us today by Roxana and Danielle. So with that, off we go to a couple more housekeeping things. In case you are wondering, this is the Creating and Connecting Data Training Ecosystems, the virtual experience. Once again, if this isn't the session that you meant to attend, stick around. You might find something that interests you. You're welcome. So for our agenda today, we're just going to do a couple of brief introductions. As noted in the session description, we are running this session in a flipped manner. We recorded a number of presentations beforehand to give you an option to view those at your own leisure. And what we have at the session today is presenters from each of those pre-recorded sessions here to start off by answering questions that you might have about their presentations, and then moving the discussion on into what are some of those groups working on, how do we as a community come together to further that work, what are other areas that the community could effectively and successfully work on. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing there. And then we'll move into any other business. Again, collaborative notes. To contribute or to ask questions, I would ask that you can either go ahead and access the chat to ask a question in there. You can also click on the participants button to raise your hand, and I will be monitoring the participants and chat lists in there to try to grab those. If that doesn't work, you can always just unmute yourself and say, I have a question, I would like to make a comment, and that's perfectly okay as well. And I think, yeah, with that, we're going to get started. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and we'll do those quick introductions that I mentioned. So here we go with that. So welcome, one and all. Very happy to have you here on the screen in the Zoom at the session. I'd like to start out by asking the presenters for this session to go ahead and introduce themselves. I'll go ahead and start that off. Hello, my name is Amy Nernberger. I am a co-chair of the Education and Training on Handling Research Data Interest Group. My institution is the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where I am the program head for data management services. And with that, Marcella, you're really close to me on the Zoom screen, so I'm going to pass that introduction off to you next.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Marcela Alfaro, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Costa Rica. I'm here as a co-chair of the CODATA RDA Schools for Data Science, and I'm going to talk about my experience bringing the schools to Costa Rica. Thank you again.
Thank you, Marcela, for that. Very much appreciated. Ming Fang.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. My name is Ming Fang Wu. I'm a research data specialist working for Australia Research Data Commons. For this session, I'm representing the research metadata schemas working group from RDA, because we also considering how to describe training materials, so what metadata needed to make training material fundable. So you will hear from my video presentation. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ming Fang. Maria Johnson. You did a lovely presentation for us on behalf of the Learning Resources Inventory.
Yes, hi there. I'm Maria Johnson from Lund University in Sweden. I'm here to represent the focus group that they had on the inventory on learning resources. So looking forward to hearing about the discussions tonight.
Who knows, this day, this session.
Day or night.
Day or night, we're talking about research data.
Yes.
Thank you, Maria. Irina.
Thanks a lot. I'm Irina Kuchma. I'm also on the same task force as Maria, and happy to answer any questions and looking forward to the session and discussions.
Thank you very much, Irina. Have I missed anyone else from our lovely group of contributing presenters? It's a field of names, and I don't want to overlook anyone. If so, speak up. Wonderful. Well, that leaves me, like I said, I'm Amy. I also exist on both the minimal metadata focus group for enabling discovery for learning resources, as well as the extended documentation for enabling reuse of learning resources once you have discovered them. So with that, I'd like to start by opening up the floor for thoughts and questions for any of the presenters. I thought, did anyone have anything straight off? Then I'd like to start out by addressing a question to you, Marcela, actually about the work that you've done with the RDA Co-Data School and how this interacted with the research training, data training initiatives from CNAT, because there seemed to be an integration between those two. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you worked that out.
Thank you. That's a really good question. It was originally the schools came to the American continent for the first time in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, and it was through the ICTP sister institution, the SAFIR. So we were looking for an ICTP kind of institution in Central America, and since we don't have an ICTP option around here, CENAT, Centro Nacional de Tecnología, or National Center for Technology, was a good option. They were really interested in providing classes for data science specifically, and they already have a list of classes for skills in R, skills in Python, but they were not connected with the carpentries, for example. They didn't have the same style, or nor they were in touch with topics as ethical data science or research data management as a topic. So they welcomed pretty well our initiative, and in 6 months we managed to organize the school that happened last year.
That sounds really great. From that effort, are there particular learnings that you would pass on to anyone else who was looking to do something similar?
Apart from knocking doors without fear, that it's a lesson that I learned. I thought my idea of these centers that provide training is that they have all figured out, and that's not the case. I mean, they are pretty open to get new classes and pretty open to have curriculums that have been tested in other countries, specifically in data-related curriculum, but also keep the communication channels open, because there was a part of Senat that was not really convinced at the beginning, but thanks to several exchanges that we had with previous instructors and how we showed the curriculum, we managed to convince them that this was the best way to go. And happily, they are open to repeat the schools. And now, because we have an agreement with Brazil, it's 1 year in Sao Paulo, 1 year in San Jose, and they are happy to repeat the schools next year here in San Jose, Costa Rica. But now, since the school in Sao Paulo has been canceled due to COVID, then we might have to move it. But yeah.
So a general learning for all of us, COVID has made things more complicated. As we keep learning over and over again in many different situations. Thank you for that, Marcela, much appreciated. Does anyone else have questions for Marcela about her experiences with RDA CoData School or other aspects of providing this type of training within the setting provided in Costa Rica? I think one of the other questions I have for you, Marcela, is thinking about some of the things that we're kind of been focusing on in this particular group around, availability of learning resources and being able to find them and reuse them and things like topics in that type of area. Are there particular things that stand out for you where you either had difficulties in finding resources that were appropriate for use or reusing them, or you ran across some really great ideas where you were able to find appropriate learning reuses or resources and able to reuse them?
In terms, I think what I understood from your question is if we had to adapt some of the curriculum that we had in other places to the reality from this region. And the answer is yes, especially for research data management examples. Most of our materials are from Foster or some European organizations, and they have great examples about case studies in the European Union. But we don't have the same legal framework. We don't share a lot of regulations with Europe, and although some of them are great, that I wish we could have them in here as well, some of them are not at all adapted to our reality. So when talking to the students about case studies, ethical problems when dealing with data, a lot of the examples had GDPR issues, or even with the framework from the law in California, but not in here. And so that was one big challenge for us. The other one was having, well, this was not a challenge. This shouldn't have been a challenge because we didn't have data sets from Costa Rica for the school, even though there's plenty of data available in here, but the instructors were using the material from other schools. And so it was easier to reuse the examples from other regions. And I think one thing that we should improve is to use data, not only from Costa Rica, but from the region. That's, yeah. And I feel, I have empirical evidence with my students in statistics that students learn the different tools way better when they are dealing with data sets that can identify or can, they may click with it. So yeah, that's one.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for that, Marcela, much appreciated. I see some hands up. I'm going to turn first to Gabriela. Did you have a question? Go ahead and turn your mic on.
Sí, voy a hacer la pregunta en español. Me gustaría saber en tu experiencia, Marcela, en esta introducción del tema de datos abiertos y especialmente del manejo de datos, ¿verdad? De los planes de manejo de datos para la investigación y en la adaptación que has tenido que hacer de lo que has aprendido y en tus relaciones con, más bien con Europa o con con estas líneas de Europa y de Estados Unidos en esa adaptación para Costa Rica, ¿cuáles han sido las mayores resistencias que tú crees que deberíamos de empezar más bien a trabajar para ir introduciendo el tema y que se vuelva una práctica común?
Okay, so now I'm going to respond this in English because I think they have the translation, but I think that the main challenge is to get to new students. Sometimes I think we are preaching to the choir. We get students that are already interested in open their research data and they need tools for it, which is great. But I think the main challenge specifically for the Central American region is to reach out to new students, especially to those students that haven't heard anything about research data management or that have no interest, sadly, to open their data. That's the main challenge. And why that happens, sometimes their advisors have the traditional position that research data shouldn't be open, sadly, but that happens a lot. And sometimes the same institutions, the universities, do not have the policy or the incentives to push PhD students, master students, or early career researchers to open their data. So I think those are the two main challenges in here.
Thank you for that question, Gabriela, and thank you for your answer, Marcela.
Yeah.
Very much so. Maria, you also had a question.
Also a question for Marcela. Nice to hear about your experiences with the data school. I'm wondering, are you having kind of a follow-up with your students sometime after the school has passed a few months? I realize myself, also having had training lately with the PhD students in RDM, and I realize how are they doing, and yeah, I should have a follow-up. So have you planned something like that? Because this is obviously something they, as young researchers, will have to cope with now, from now and on in the future.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And I'm glad you asked, because it's important to talk about the alumni network that we have for the schools. And this is something that we have thanks to the network of schools, not only the school in Costa Rica. We have an alumni network. And for example, last August, we had the first Train the Trainer event online. It was supposed to be Trieste, our 5th anniversary, but we did a Train the Trainer, and that was specifically for alumni. So we had 3 or 4 alumni from the school in Costa Rica. But apart from that, we have a WhatsApp group where we keep sending, invitations to talks, webinars, interesting things online, even jokes sometimes. And I know that from the group of 30 students, there have been some subgroups that also, they met in there, they're good friends. And I've seen that not only in the school in Costa Rica, but also in other schools. And in some very special cases, we even have scientific collaborations from there. And that's part of our objectives with the school, is that it's to shape those networks and give the students opportunities to get to know people from other areas maybe, but with the same interest in data.
Thanks. That's so nice to hear. Good tips with the WhatsApp. Yeah. Great, thanks.
To keep current with these things. Thank you for Maria for the question, and Marcela again for your answer. Any other questions for Marcela? I think one of the interesting questions that you actually mentioned at the end of your presentation is, how does something like one of these schools, this type of training, fit into the data steward professionalization interest group? And I don't know if we have anyone from the data professionalization interest group here.
Yeah, I am a member.
Irina, thank you. But and Maike had posted a video based on the intersections between the professionalization interest group as well as this group, the education and training. But I'm wondering, Irina, are there any comments you might offer on what you might see as some of the crossovers between the schooling experience and what the interest group on data stewardship for professionalization is trying to achieve?
That's a hard question at 2 in the morning. Because this interest group has just started, so we're looking at the whole life cycle, you might say, from making a business case to job profiles to training materials to support new data stewards to terminology, which isn't standardized yet in this area, certification, career paths.
And so from that perspective, perhaps, when I was listening to Mike A and I was looking at the interest group and as you say, it's not an established interest group yet, but it's going there. Some of the areas that I think you're looking at are, what types of classes would feed into this type of establishing oneself as a data steward or someone who's participating in the data stewardship profession, right? And I think that has some links in as well, thinking about how do we as a community who's focused on thinking about education for ourselves, for others in the profession, as well as with researchers and beyond that, how do we bring all of that together into a recognized area to be trained within as a specialization, as something that these are the types of knowledge that fit into that field, that area of knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I forgot to mention networking, which is also one of the focus groups, because we feel like networking among data stewards is also important.
I would definitely agree with you on that. It's very important when you're often the only data steward at your institution. Having those others out there is so helpful. Thoughts from other people on this idea around data stewardship as an area of developing professionalization and how this group, the Education and Training on Handling Research Data group, might work within that conversation as well?
It was interesting. We have 8 areas, and when we discussed what would be the first priority for our DA session participants, training was picked up as a top priority, as first choice for people attending the session. So there was a lot of interest around training.
And would it be fair to say, Irina, that when you're thinking about training in that type of setting, it's really thinking about, is it more thinking about these are the places where you can get that knowledge from, or almost more of a certification type of training?
And also learning paths. So for example, I need to develop the skills or competence, and I can access relevant training or learning materials based on those learning pathways.
Right, recognizing that there are different areas of specialization, perhaps, within that broader field of data stewardship.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that.
And of course, there are lots of interests, lots of connections with our learning resources collectors task force.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that there are a lot in there, and I can't wait to dig into some of those as we move into that. But Stephanie, go ahead. You have your hand up. What's your question?
Yes, hello. Good
Hello.
night, everyone, depending on your time zone. Well, maybe I'm a bit behind because I still had a question for Marcela, but then I was waiting to see how the direction of the talk was going, and then I said, no, I need to raise my hand.
Go
So,
for it.
Marcela, okay. Well, I'm from the Universidad Nacional, so very nice to meet you. I didn't know about these schools. I'm a bit new. I came back to Costa Rica after I finished my PhD. So my question is, these schools are clustered by the CNCA, right? What happens if they don't have enough capacity to take all the students who want to take courses? Do you have like another space at the UCR, or are you working on that to expand um, these schools? Because it's very interesting at the Universidad Nacional. We are starting on this. I work for the School of Biological Sciences, and this is one of my key goals, right? To start up this field at the school. So that's my question.
Thank you, Stephanie. We can, there are currently two initiatives specifically with Universidad Nacional that are, one is a data stewardship school for the research managers and some researchers that is going to happen in December, and that was thanks to the same connection with RTA. And the other one is the possibility of expanding the Senat school to UNA, but that's still it's still an open question. My initial goal was to have the curriculum of the Codata RDA schools included in the postgraduate programs from the University of Costa Rica. And I managed to advance 2 stages of bureaucracy, but then I hit a wall. So the the problem is that, as I said before, there's some resistance of like there's people who hear about data stewardship or topics about data management and think immediately in open data and open science, and they have sadly they think that's not a good idea, and it's sad, but it's a reality that we have to take into account when planning on this kind of classes. And as I said before, the most important advice that I could give is to start talking about the importance on data stewardship as a career and the importance of data techniques or knowing data techniques in our different areas of knowledge, not only in stats, right? Because I come from a stats department that's natural for my area, but also for social sciences, for linguistics, for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm from the School of Biological Sciences, and if I can help in anything, please let me know. I will love to implement these or help to implement these at my university too. So we can speak later on. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Stephanie. And to help out with those networking efforts, I've once again posted the link to our collaborative notes in the chat, and I would encourage you to go there and enter your name and contact information as an attendee in that space so that you can find each other and follow up on some of these questions and discussions after we're done here. Claudia, I see you have your hand up. Take it away.
Hi everyone. Hi Amy, long time no see. Marcela, never saw you, but I hope we can still. I invited Marcela to come to Brazil, but then we had COVID. But I had, like everybody else, a name thing. Hello. Well, hello, lots of people I know. Hi, Irina. If I keep saying hello, I want to ask my question. I actually have 2 questions. The first one concerns data stewardship because in Finland, I was at a meeting where there was this huge discussion about who's a data steward and who's a data librarian. And it turned out that they're very different things. And but last week I was at a meeting where there was this a keynote researcher from South Africa, and she kept talking about data scientists. And all we need is data scientists. and asked her, what are data scientists for you? And she said, it's for ACE, archiving, IT architecture, auditing, and analysis. Okay, so is that something that you've seen connected with the name data science? Because to me that it's just analysis, right? So these are the two questions. What are data stewards? Are you talking about Delft data stewards, or are you talking about the synonym of data librarian? And the second is, has anyone here ever heard of data scientists as doing archiving and IT architecture and all that sort of thing? Thank you.
That's a really great question. Irina, if you want to jump in on that, please feel free. But I also know it's 2 o'clock in the morning. So if you don't want to, I can answer some of those questions. But I'll give you first chat.
Thanks. And
Irina
hello,
never
Claudia.
sleeps. Hi, Irina doesn't sleep.
I actually did before we started, and that was my mistake. So you're right, Claudia. They seem to be quite different roles, because when we talk about data stewards, we mean those who provide support to researchers on research data management, and data scientists and data analysts are, like you said, people working with data. So they are part of training activities, but they're not really playing this support role in institutions. But that's my understanding. And like I said, we're still discussing terminology. And over to you, Amy.
Thanks for that, Irina. I think you're right. We are still discussing terminology. And to your question, Claudia, I think we're fairly clear that data librarians have historically, conventionally served a different niche than data stewards have. Now, when it gets into data science, it's a really interesting conversation. And I would posit that the commonly understood role of data science has not involved those areas of skill that data stewards are known for. Now, there is a wonderful paper by a gentleman called Donahoe called 50 Years of Data Science, which lays out that if we were doing data science right, data science would be doing all of those things that we expect data stewards to do. But unfortunately, we have not been doing data science right. And it's a nice goal to try to think about recovering data science to do it right. But I also fear at the same time that we're too far down the path of exactly what you described, Claudia, that data science has really narrowly focused in primarily on just doing data analysis, really as an outgrowth of statistics to an extent, that has not really encompassed all of the other areas that it should have in performing data science in a responsible way, which is one of the reasons why we need those rules of data stewardship and those understandings of data stewardship. And part of that has also been because data science hasn't necessarily emphasized many of the things that data stewards do. Data stewardship has often grown out of the librarians, and because of our librarianship, and because of that has frequently emphasized the human aspects of interacting with data, which is something that traditionally, again, data science, growing from its nascent fields, has not done. And it's really in those spaces of considering data in relationship to humans, their data stewardship really takes effect, where we start thinking about what does it mean to have a human find and understand the data, which is very different from what does it mean to analyze the data doing quote unquote data science. And I think recognizing, first of all, that gap exists, that there is a need for understanding that humans interacting with data and understanding data and what's been done to the data is something that has been is an area of long oversight. Does that answer that question to an extent, Claudia? if you are.
Yes, I was looking for a microphone. There's also another debate because I wanted to understand the scope of this course, the scope data course that Marcella was talking about, because some of my students took it, and it was mostly data science. There was not what I call, curation, which I call a data janitor, because you have to do the cleanup and washing and make data beautiful, so that after all, data scientists, at least the ones I know, can come and become the stars of the analysis. So what was exactly the emphasis of this Go Data course in Costa Rica?
The curriculum in Costa Rica was the same as in the other locations. It's a combination of skills for what traditionally we know as data science, what you were describing, analysis, and sometimes recommendation systems, basic R or Python, depending on the school. But the part where it goes more on the like data librarian is with that we have a research data management class. It's actually 2 whole days of research data management. That is the part we don't do much cleaning or wrangling for the data, because it's true that the analysis part is with data sets that are already prepared for analysis, but we do have in the research data management an experience, a hands-on experience with papers that have been published, and they have references on the data that they use. So students in group, the, 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 the task is to look for the data, download it, and replicate the analysis that was done in the paper without consulting the authors from the paper. And we have different, but we have had different experiences. Sometimes the papers are not reproducible at all. Sometimes they are, or replicable, sorry. And that's the part where we use the term research data science as a combination of research data management, analysis, and ethics, which is the backbone of our curriculum.
Thank you.
Sure.
Did you have another question, Claudia, or does that cover it?
You know me, I always have questions, right? So the scope of this session is covering all activities associated with the data lifecycle, including analysis, or what?
So the scope of this interest group is, as it was originally envisioned, was all the things. Yes, educating on all the things, which is why the name is what it is. It's education and training on handling of research data and all of those things that might be interpreted as handling research data, from data stewardship to data librarianship to data science and analysis to data cleaning and wrangling and janitoring and all of those things. So it's very broadly scoped as an interest group. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those questions, Claudia. So with that, having defined the scope of this group as very large and acknowledging that there are a lot of different areas we could be working in, 3 of the main areas that we are working in right now grew out of our last plenary session, which had been meant to be Australia and was our first virtual session. And out of that, we had 3 focus groups arise, and those are the Learning Resources Inventory, which you've already heard Irina refer to, as well as the minimal metadata to enable discovery of learning resources and extent documentation for enabling reuse of learning resources. So I wanted to take this time right now to bring up the work of these groups, what they've been doing, and how the community might be interested in contributing to these groups or have thoughts about the work that these groups are doing. So let's go ahead and start off with the briefest of overviews, Irina, if you don't mind, for the Learning Resources Inventory.
Yes. Or shall I do this, or will you do this, Maria?
Oh, sorry, Maria.
Yeah, no,
Whichever.
go ahead, Irina. So and I join you. So you can start.
Mm-hmm. So we produced the first draft of a document which is now open for consultations, which is called Core Characteristics of Learning Resource Collectors. And by collectors, we mean catalogs and registries of training materials. It's available as a Google Doc and linked to from the notes. And we try to highlight some of the areas which we consider important for these training resource collectors. So how they deal with content, how they describe content, how they address governance issues, operations. And we came up with 15 criteria, which all in draft. So if you are involved in managing registries of training materials, if you could have a look at the checklist and see whether you recognize the operations or whether anything is missing or shouldn't be there and it's there. And the idea is to use it as a checklist for those who plan registries of training materials and also operate.
Great, thank you, Irina. I think that lays out some of the work that you're doing. Is there anything you wanted to add, Maria?
Yes, I could say that our work in the focus group has been quite exploratory during these months, and we are kind of working in a very evolving landscape of having more and more resources on training being created in the world, and also at the same time I believe we have a bigger and bigger audience and market for using these resources. So and also I've seen we haven't had so much contact with the other focus group, the minimal documentation and the extended documentation groups, but I realize we the three focus groups on this have a lot in common. So I was just thinking if we should merge our work quite soon to really because it relates very much to each other, and also that we should take the chance to market our results or lists to the end users, to the market, to the researchers, to the data librarians quite soon. So because as we see now with the data schools, with the PhD training, it's a growing market of having these tools and these collections of training resources. So yeah.
I think you're absolutely right about that, Maria, that there's that both sides of that market equation are definitely growing. There are more and more people making those resources, and there certainly are more and more people, thankfully, looking for those resources as well. And I think one of the questions that you actually had coming out of this is you were really looking for people's opinion about what are some of the core characteristics that should exist for these organizations that are acting as learning resource collectors. What would people find useful in there, right? And I think I'd love to hear from some of the people in the session, but I would also love to hear Mingfang from you and your particular perspective as coming from the research schemas working group.
Sorry, Amy, could you repeat your question?
Well, reflecting on what Maria and Irina have said about the Learning Resources Inventory Group, one of the things that they're looking at is, ways in which to describe the characteristics of these learning resource collectors. And of course, this works straight into metadata. How are we describing these things? And I know that you had a number of areas of intersection with other interest areas of this particular group, which is at this point in time highly focused on issues of metadata, whether that's of learning resource collectors, what their characteristics are, how are they describing things, or of resource creators and reusers. How do resource creators describe the materials that they're producing? How do they describe them so that they can be reused successfully by others out there in the community?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Sorry, I was reading the checklist and find the operation, the ones from checklist was quite have an overlap with what we are doing. So I suddenly hear the names. Sorry, it's not that I'm not listening. Okay, so actually, so our group research metadata schemas. So we don't provide or organize the training ourselves, but look at how people to describe their resources. So we primarily focus on the data, but we also, the trainings, the software, they're all related to data. So you make data fundable also, if data linked to training material, linked to other things will make training material and the data both more findable. So my initial question was like, for our group, first for our group, we don't provide schemas ourselves, but look at what the common schemas used by community for describing data training material. But we do look at the commonality among the repositories, what kind of properties they used for describing resources, so we can recommend what the minimal metadata should be included in structured data. That's structured data is more for fundability for web resources. So for the training material, we didn't touch that often. So so two questions occur to us. So first, where do people publish training materials? So lots of people publish training materials from their website or in Google Doc, shared by a designated community. I think if you organize training sessions yourself, you have a designated group and disseminate training material accordingly. That's probably the method you do. But there are more people there, I believe, and learning, adaptive learning, they mean learning them self-adapted learning. They would like find materials for that learning skills. So where are those training material published? The website, the Google Doc, the web, web pages as such. So either way, so what the semantics, the model you use to describe the training material? I only see the checklist now. I think that probably answered by some of this document. And another thing I'm looking at from the document is you talking about the, have a JSON, have RDF and all this to at the syntax level to describe source. That's also one focus of our group. So so we need to add the semantic interoperability and also syntactically interoperable with each other. Even you use the same vocabulary describe training material, but you implement it with 100 formats, different ways to implement that. That's not good for, say, Google search engine to pick up and to pass. So that's from publish side. So from funding side, finding material side. So where do you think your those people come to the training course or from other place? Where do they find the training data? And how do they find the training data? This probably come to the interaction Amy mentioned before, all come the old school library science. How do people find the things? What do they find? And what kind of, platform they use to find? That's probably, that's find and publish two sides of coins. So I don't have an answer, but we would I just pose the questions so we could take that together, either in this group or in the group I'm co-chairing, so we can come and probably come and task force to attack down there.
Those are some really great questions, Mingfang, and it's wonderful to hear them because I think you're absolutely right. The focus groups are working on exactly those questions, so it's good to know that this is coming together. Certainly, the inventory of learning resources group is attempting to answer that question of where do these learning resources exist, and also where do people go to finding these learning resources? So I think there's some opportunities there, certainly for crossover work between those two groups. And then the other two groups, the minimal metadata group, has certainly done some foundational work on looking at what are the other metadata schemes out there that are used to describe learning resources, and where are there gaps, what are the comparisons between those look like, and trying to answer those questions around discovery. And then the extended group is really trying to dig into that more challenging problem sometimes of how do you know if something that you found is fit for your usage, and how might you reuse that, and how do you also communicate that to someone else that this was good for reuse or this was not so fabulous for reuse. And of course that loops right back around to the learning resources inventory group about how do they use that information within the inventory to communicate that again to people who are looking to use and reuse and create and things like that. So I think there's a lot of potential to do some really strong collaborations between the metadata working group as well as the work that these particular focus groups are developing.
Yes.
So with that in mind, we have one precious half hour left of our time together as a community to talk about some of these issues that concern us, things that we would like to see. So I have a question for you. Is this something where we'd like to try to continue this discussion in the very large group, or would we like to go into breakout groups? To have these conversations in some smaller groups about work that's developing, what type of work is being done, how is the work moving forward. So in your participants window, you have two markers. There's a yes marker and a no marker. If you would like to stay in the large group for this discussion, if you think that's the appropriate way to go forward, go ahead and put a yes next to your name. If you are like, breakout groups for the win, go ahead and put a no next to your name. I will patiently watch for about a minute to see if the yeses or the nos are winning. So this would also be a great time to take a bio break if you need to do that. After you've marked a thing next to your name.
I have to see some students now. Okay, so I'm not going to be able to stay, but this is very interesting. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. See
you,
you
Claudia.
tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. It looks like the let's stay here and talk about it group is winning out here. So we are going to stay here and talk about it. So we have this time. What are some of the, we've talked about what the group has been working on, and it's really centered around there are a lot of learning resources out there. How do we make better use of them as a community, in essence, and attacking that from three different perspectives? From, where do we find resources in the learning resources inventory? How do we find them in the discovery minimal metadata group? And then what do we do with them once we find them in the extended documentation group? And how do we make them easier for people to use? So I'd like to really open the floor up now for some conversation. Are there ways you would like to contribute to the work of these three groups? Are there other areas of interest that you have that you think this community could be effectively working around? And I've been teaching remote classes since March, so I have a wealth of patience in just waiting for someone to speak up. Maria, please.
Yes. I'm taking the unmute and okay. I would love to, being in the focus group on the inventory, I would love to have some collaboration with people within the data schools, trainers, to test our list of collections. And also I really like your question, Ming Fang, where do people find training material, training resources? Where do researchers, PhD students, where do they go to find these kind of resources on training? And that I'm very, very curious on hearing from my perspective, being in the focus group on inventory, so that we can have starting a discussion, collaborations between us, and at the end reaching out to our audience, to our market of upcoming researchers who will make use of these resources in the longer run, and also the trainers themselves, those who are organizing this, and often it's librarians, teachers. So in all, starting in a kind of a community for discussing this. We're just in the start of all this, so but there's no, as we saw in our group, there's no kind of a standard for creating training material. Everyone do as they like, and that fits them for the moment being, for the situation. So that's also, it's a very different landscape right now of training materials. So yeah.
So, sorry,
Please.
question for you. So for you, Maria, you said the lack of metadata for training materials. So my question is, how that training material different from the course and libraries worked in the past, spent lots of effort how to publish and describe courses. How that is different from that course. So we don't reinvent wheel. So I feel that there are lots of activities from library, before for publishing catalog course, and they did a lot of research in, metadata and item finding or something that we could learn from.
Yes, and often, I mean, researchers and PhD students, they don't have they want something prepared, ready to go, to just use. So the more we can share and reuse, the better of these kind of materials, I think. Just that we have to have some kind of an community, common platform for exchanging these experiences and these resources. So yeah, this group, this interest group, would be kind of the one center of it, but there will be obviously many collaborations between us and the other groups in RDA. So yeah.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that, Maria. The potential for collaborations amongst many of the other RDA groups, whether that's libraries or some of the disciplinary specific groups who might be looking for training for their particular groups of researchers as well. So two of the things that I heard specifically coming out of that is one, the importance of networking, of creating a stronger community in and of itself among people who are offering resources, people who are doing trainings, right? And that's one part, that it should be more than just this once every 6 months conversations or these smaller events that take place here and there, where we often end up with siloed conversations and siloed solutions. So I think that's one interesting potential area, is that community development. But another thing that really struck me about what you said, Maria, is the desire for a common structure or a standard for creating trainings. And I found this a really interesting contrast between that and what Marcela had brought up before around thinking about the RDA CoData schools, which offers a framework kind of curriculum, but also the need within that to be able to adapt it to localized needs and perspectives, recognizing that not everyone has the benefit or otherwise of GDPR to refer to, or of EOSC to reference as an infrastructure to use, and thinking about how to communicate what those adaptations or what those contexts are for those learning materials might be a really important part of understanding how to enable discovery and reuse of particular learning resources. Do other people have thoughts on either of these areas? Please, Marcela.
Thank you. Something really important for us in the Central American region is to have also translations. And I know for PhD researchers and master students, they are already at the level that they need English as a second language. But for us, having all the material in English, it's really a bad barrier that just enlarges the gap of like socioeconomical gaps. So if we actually make this inventory, I would love to invite the Spanish speakers in this session to reunite efforts and start translating materials, teaching materials, because we do need it in Spanish, and why not other languages.
Yeah, that's a really important point, Marcela. And it's one that we actually touched on in our last session in the plenary, is that so much of the training is is often very English centered, and even when there are good trainings that are in other languages, it's very difficult to adapt and reuse them. And I know that some of the discussions around what are appropriate minimal metadata for describing some of these is, first of all, the language, but I think the point that you bring up as well, kind of that idea of being able to branch or version in that GitHub flavor of things to create those translations of resources is an important thing to think about when we're thinking about what does it look like to have content that can be adapted and reused, and how do we support credit for those? How do we support tracking that type of knowledge, that type of content exists, right? So to one of your questions, Maria and Irina, for the inventory group, it sounds like one of the core characteristics is the ability to adapt to different linguistic demands or requirements.
Most interesting. I just put that as a note. Good. But indeed very important. I'm just thinking that if we have it in people's language, how fast, how powerful it can be to reach out with this. So it's very, very important and could be very, very powerful. Yeah, good.
Other thoughts on potential areas? Of conversation.
I was wondering about this findability angles that Ming-Fang mentioned. Is it something that we can include in the checklists? Like how do you ensure findability of your materials? Would it be possible for training resource collectors to answer this question? Because I guess it's part of FAIR discussions, but it's broader than just FAIR.
Yeah, and can you say a little bit more about what you're thinking about in terms of the findability there, Irina?
Well, we haven't really addressed that issue at all. We looked at the published side, but we didn't look at the find side of the coin that Ming-Fang mentioned.
Do you mean from the inventory perspective, not just where the resources exist, but that we know of, but where do people actually go to find the resources? That findability juxtaposition, that two sides of things.
And from the checklist perspective, is it something that should be included as additional category?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's. Also agree. Yeah. I also agree, absolutely. The discovery aspect of it, and what have a producer of a training material thought as of an aspect of a discovery of this material, which is part of FAIR, of course, but yeah, we will certainly have that in mind when continuing in the focus group.
Yeah. So I'd like to bring attention to a couple of things from the chat. First of all, the Google Notes, and everyone is welcome to take notes in the Google document. Those live on beyond the conference, and they're available in off of the RDA, the group description of the session. So those are always going to be always in terms of digital, so for at least the next 3 years, going to be available from the description of the session. The notes are linked from there, so if you're wondering where these notes go after we're done, that's where they go. That's where you're able to find them, so you can refer back to them for that. But one of the other things I wanted to turn people to is there's a comment here from Bob Belford, who's talking about a resources, an open educational resource from LibreText that has a Spanish hyperlibrary for a Jupyter notebook that's used in a cheminformatics class in case people are looking for some Spanish language resources. That looks like a useful thing. And if you're also worried about the notes in the chat disappearing, I'll be asking the session organizers to export the chat notes to me, and those will end up in this Google Notes doc as well. So we should be able to keep our information as good data management practitioners for ourselves to refer to. But I think that's a great thing to know about, Bob. And I would bet that, of all of the inventories that we've covered so far, whether that's like foster resources or the data management training clearinghouse or things like that, this particular knowledge isn't captured in there. And that might be another thing to think about as well, as how do we pull the information that we know exists and enter it into these registries, these catalogs that have been growing for training resources. If you found something but you aren't the creator, how do you communicate that to a centralized location so other people can benefit from that content knowledge as well? Bob, did you want to say something there?
Well, forgive me. The cheminformatics stuff is not in Spanish.
Oh, so sorry.
But there is a Spanish hyperlibrary, and there's a huge effort, and it is an OER, and it's international.
Good to know. Do you know who's behind the hyperlibrary effort there for that OER?
Well, actually, believe it or not, this week is also the Open Ed week. So I'm sitting on 2 virtual conferences simultaneously, and given so I'm one of the PIs on the 2 of the grants, but Delmar Larson at UC Davis is the lead PI. And I wasn't trying to put a plug in for LibreText. I'm just simply, but OER is the way to go. But I run an Internet of Things lab, and my real hope is to be able to find ways of streaming data into the define metadata to allow people to have IoT stuff.
Ah, interesting.
So, but if we can help, LibreText is free.
It's right there in the name. Thank you for that, Bob. Much appreciated for that resource. Other thoughts about thinking about exactly those things. How do we work in this space effectively for our community? Any thoughts about the comment that I think, Maria, that you had brought forward about, how do we think about creating a stronger community so that we can more effectively share what resources are out there, just like Bob has just done?
And also, if you want to join any of the focus groups, that would be wonderful, because we need more people.
There are a few people who are on all 3 focus groups, and it would be great to have the diversity of perspectives that are necessary for really exemplary work to be suitable across a multitude of situations. So I notice in our attendees list, we have some members who have definitely been to some of our sessions before, and I would welcome you as well to reflect on where this group has been and where it's going, the work that it's doing, if you have anything to offer in that space.
Hey, Amy.
Yeah.
It's Andrea Medina Smith. How are you doing?
Great.
So nice to see you too. I got to work a little bit with one of the working groups on finding resources that were available. And my biggest concern, I think, and everybody has this concern, is how do we keep them up to date? And, if the hyperlink is broken, but nobody's checking, all that sort of thing. So what I would recommend moving forward with any of these sort of lists is to work with an organization that can help set up either a registry that basically has records about each of the resources. They can be pretty simple. They can be very complex if you want them to be. They can, you can push and share between different organizations if you use certain software that NIST has created. But yeah, that would be one thing. And it's pretty simple, but it's still kind of a big lift. But I think really important that if we are going to be putting out a list of resources and, we're saying that these meet some sort of standards and a level of usefulness, then we need to make sure that they're actually still available. And having them in some sort of database that can do that automatic checking would be really, really helpful. I unfortunately don't have the technical skills to get that up and running, but I know what we need.
I think you're right with that, Andrea, and certainly one of the issues is exactly that, is that even when you have registries, with like the Data Management Training Clearinghouse, that's a list of links, and links are easily broken, as we all know. But you compare that to something like the Foster collection on Zenodo. So it's in a repository, but there isn't really a great search interface or search registry that's customized to the needs of those who are looking for resource sources, either as a trainer or as a learner. So yes, recognized challenge there. All we need to do is write a grant.
Get some people who can, fund some people, and then we'll be fine.
And then it'll be great, because yeah.
And in 5 years, when the grant's over with, we won't have any problems whatsoever.
It is solved because, the grants have like the magic wand of sustainability just right there.
Yeah, to have a registry, I need some funding for that, not just.
So I wonder if this is actually a really important point, right? The idea that a lot of the training that goes on is on that in the spare time on the shoestring without necessarily the funding or the backing, and this is part of the heart of the issue, right? That there isn't that kind of dedication to recognizing these training resources as a necessary and foundational resource in order to grow research, in order to grow open research, in order to support all of these other wonderful things, because it's lovely. I love saying FAIR. It's one of my favorite acronyms, and then there's CARE right next to it. But you have to have continually training to support that, and really thinking more critically about where and how that training comes from and how that training is supported. Which gets us back to professionalization of data stewardship, potentially. So here's another interesting question from the chat. How will you make sure the resources themselves, the content that are recommended in the registry or are noted in the registry, are up to date?
So I think when we were looking for resources, it's Andrea again, that we were doing the curation. There was a human set of eyes looking at it, making sure that it made sense, and, looking at the copyright dates if they had those, or the last updated dates. And even if something was 10 years old, it still may be useful, but that there is some sort of human curation that's happening. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I think there's the human curation aspect of it. I also think there's the aspect of, if there's the ability to have a feedback loop about the usefulness or usability of the training resource, that eventually, if something becomes out of date, it's going to be used less and less, so that its usability ranking or what have you might fall, and that might be another indicator as well, but something to consider in thinking about how we might build or how we might adapt current inventories or catalogs or registries that are out there. Karsten, it's fine that you can't talk. If you want to type it in the chat, I will be happy to talk, is to obviously demonstrate it. Yes, absolutely. Germany has some great, great activities around the RDM trainings, and there was, I'm not sure this was your particular group, Karsten, but there was a recent group out of Germany that published a bunch of resources on that, and they look excellent, and I would certainly encourage everyone to take a look at them as a great exemplar of some training that exists out there. That's a training resource that exists, and thinking about how that exists in the world and how you became aware of it, you know, just as a case study in and of itself, that this is a really good resource that a lot of attention was paid to. And how did you hear about it? How has it been discovered? How might you think about reusing it, coming at it from this perspective?
Looks like all this training material curation becomes like a data curation issue. The training material is someone else's data. It's a type of data.
It's a type of content, definitely, and
Content.
certainly the open education resource community has been working in this area for some significant amount of time, and I think there are probably things that we can learn from them as well. I haven't seen a fabulous solution yet, but fabulous solutions are few and far between, and I think people are continuing to work on what those solutions might look like. So as the field of open education resource continues to develop, and you know, specifically for those things that aren't necessarily structured as courses but are really structured more as resources, I would believe that there are areas that we can learn from each other on, and thinking about how those might how those metadata structures, how those tools, registries, repositories might be adapted to each of our situations. Hannah has also mentioned a resource for research data curators that anyone can contribute to in the lovely data curation network. As another resource, this resource tends to be more for the activity of curating data rather than teaching or training, but it's great for a discipline-specific file type in there to use as part of a curriculum, as part of a tool for a localized subject specialty. Thank you, Bob, for including that reference to the other conference that you're listening to simultaneously, because you have 2 ears, so you can totally listen to 2 things. All right, we have 5 minutes left. If anyone has I've been waiting to say this one thing for this whole time, now is your chance to say that one thing for this whole time, so speak up. If not, I will thank you all once again for your participation, your thoughts, your contributions. I really hope to see you continue your contributions in the focus groups, even if this was an off time for you. If you go to the resources that are linked at the top of the Google Doc notes, you will find the information there for the focus groups. There's also information about the focus groups in each of the presentations on our YouTube channel and our YouTube playlist about what those groups are working on and how you might become involved in that work. And I would strongly encourage you, even if you just dip your toes in the water, try to get a little sense about what's going on, what the kind of the work it is, and how it might adapt to your own situation. I think a couple of the groups are currently collecting case studies. So that would be a really excellent contribution right now, is you thinking about, so how does this apply to what my experience has been in terms of being a learner, in terms of being a trainer and looking for a resource, in terms of being a trainer and creating a resource and thinking about how that might be reused. So please check those things out. Again, they are linked in the Google document notes. And I wish you the best of the rest of your current waking period, unless you're going immediately to bed, and then I wish you the sweetest of dreams. Thank you again, everyone, very much. Have a good rest of your wakefulness.
Thanks a lot, Amy, and everyone.
Thank you, Amy, and everyone.
Thank you, Amy. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Night.
Bye.